to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. Do you wonder how your faith fits together with your profession? Well, join us as we explore how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Well, hello and welcome to Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission, where we explore the intersection of faith and veterinary medicine. My name is Barry Schwenk. I am a pastor, a veterinarian, and your host. This can be a real challenge when you are looking at your life in the moment, but also trying to figure out where your life is going. It seems like you're constantly in this place of adjusting, and it seems like the pressures and the priorities are changing so fast that what often falls away is your faith. There always seems to be a time where you can come back to it later. But what happens when you do wait too long? How does that change your trajectory in life? I had the privilege of talking with a third-year veterinary student from the University of Pennsylvania, George DeMers, and George is back. George, how's it going again? You doing good?
I'm doing great.
I really appreciated you talking with me last time because we talked a little bit about your journey going from Penn State as an undergrad into the University of Pennsylvania as a vet student, and even that transition. I really appreciate it. For folks that didn't get a chance to listen to the last episode, you definitely should to listen to that because you talk with quite a bit of honesty about the role of faith in your life, and then how that began to change as you encountered the Christian Veterinary Fellowship group within your school. But I wanted to talk with you a little bit more about that specifically, because I think it's an issue that is not uncommon. Have you come across that with other students or with other professionals that you worked with? And what have you thought? How has your life kind of mirrored that same kind of sentiment?
I think you see it all the time, especially anyone who's drawn to the veterinary profession. You know, we work hard and we're very, motivated to achieve, what we want, and I'm no different. When you're in high school, you're working really hard so you can fill up a bunch of stuff on a resume so you can get into college, and then you're working really hard in college so that you can get into vet school, and then you're in vet school and you're trying to get an internship and then a residency and then a job, and then you're trying to become a partner, and then you're trying to and then on top of this, you're focused on getting married, or if God willing, or having children. All these things. You can keep kicking the can down the road when it comes to God, who's sitting there waiting for you patiently, but waiting for you. And I've seen that in my life because I played that game for 22 years, until I moved to Philadelphia, of all places, which is the last place I expected for God to scream in my face. But yeah.
It's so true. I mean, quite frequently, Israel's described as a stiff-necked people, and I can resemble that. I can resemble that remark, where you just kind of get the blinders on and you're headed in a direction. And do you think that our profession selects for those kinds of people, or do you think that those kinds of people are drawn to our profession, or is it that within our profession we're actually molding and shaping people to be that way?
That's an amazing question. And, I genuinely think it's a little bit of everything. As I said in the last episode, being a vet is a hard job. Anyone who's looking for the easy way out didn't go here, and that's the same as a student, or even as someone who's aspiring to be a student. But either way, I don't know what produces this phenomenon, but it's a reality that we have to deal with and address and help others who are falling into that trap be saved out of that, you know?
Yeah. It kind of feeds into some of our human nature to maybe be in control and try to achieve. But then that also, I think that's one of the traps that as veterinarians that we sometimes can fall into is that we equate what we do with being the end all of pleasing God, right? And so I please, and we quote Colossians, if you're going to do anything, do everything as unto the Lord. And so what we will sometimes do is we will sacrifice our walk with the Lord for our time in the anatomy lab, or we will sacrifice our time with the Lord for anything and everything that helps us to appear better before the people around us within our profession. And we think that kind of maybe to some degree, we just think, well, God's going to accept us no matter what. So we don't necessarily have to grow in Him. How does that, how do you combat that? Because as a student, you're in this crucible, right? You've got, your second year at Penn is you're in the crucible, all the fire is lit and it's going and it's heating you up really fast. How do you navigate through those challenges while also trying to stay faithful and growing in the Lord?
I think there's two things. The first one, and this applies to everyone, not just anyone who works hard and is motivated. You're always at risk, and you understand this as a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
The devil wants you to be separated from the flock. And a lot of people think that, idle hands, is where the devil thrives, but it can be just the opposite. If you're so focused on ambition and achievement and working hard, he can creep in the same way, just flip it around. And so you need to combat that, and realize that no matter how busy you are, let me think this quote I heard somebody say. If they said, if you're actually too busy to pray every day, then you're too busy. and and maybe and maybe where people might chuckle, like if they're a vet right now, like you have no idea, I mean, and
Right.
you're a pastor, you're a vet, you're
Yeah.
a father.
Yeah.
But there has to be an orderly, like God gives us an orderly way to structure our lives. So, and in our club, this is something we talk about a lot. It's a famous verse, look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor store in barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. And just God knows that we need to make money. He knows that we need to pass exams. He knows all of these things. But what many of us in our club have discovered is as soon as you prioritize the spirit over the needs of the psyche and the body, everything will overflow in an orderly fashion. So that's the second thing. How do we achieve that when we're so busy? I can only speak to what I've done personally, but you have to find ways to sanctify your day as you go about, because a lot of us don't have time to sit down there and pray for an hour, just straight up, between, work and then making dinner and then putting your kids to bed or all these things. But you can find ways to pray for smaller amounts of time throughout the day. I personally use a breviary, so I pray, hours in the morning and then in the evening and then also at night. So and so I'm not praying, 45 minutes at one time. I just split it up like 10 minutes across the day. And if you can't find like 10 minutes to do something,
Right.
pray that you get more time, I guess. I don't know, but
that's what you have to do.
But you have to force yourself because it's not going to naturally happen.
Right.
And even the little things. I mean, our society has structured these things, so like praying before meals has almost become like a formality,
Right.
if it's even done at all. But like part of the reason of this is because as soon as you start going entire days or weeks without thinking about God, that is not good,
Yeah. Well, and even thinking that you're neglecting that relationship by focusing on something else will somehow be honoring to him is also a little bit, it can be a little bit foolish. I was always challenged, with the idea that as you think about the two roads, right, faith and vocation, um, I would never dream of walking into a clinic having never spent the time and energy to grow and learn and to be a better doctor first, right? And yet we think that we can walk into the world and with our marriages, with our clients, with our ethics, with the struggles of life, with our health, we think that we can just kind of like go to God and just put in our quarter and get our cosmic gumball out when we want it, because he'll understand that we're much busier with this other thing over here. And even though we're putting all of our energy into it, therefore we're somehow worshiping him by dedicating all of our time and energy to something that's not him. That's wrong. Like we can go along, we can spend a lifetime. And you mentioned, I think in our first conversation, you talked about the idea of maybe putting off your walk with the Lord until later, because you always think that there's going to be time, but that doesn't happen, does it? It is what it is. I mean, like life is, you always think that there's one more day, and you think, well, once I get to vet school, then I'll do it, or once I graduate from vet school, then I'll have time, or wait, after I get married, or wait, after I have kids, or wait, after I buy a practice, after. And as a pastor, I come in contact with a lot of people who have waited way past after and are now regretting all the things that they failed to do in their lifetime. And as veterinarians, we're setting ourselves up to do that. So how do you as a vet student, how do you prevent yourself from kicking the can down the road, right? And how do you help others to do the same?
Well, I think it's kind of like working out. Part of it is just forcing yourself to go to the gym in the first place. You know? So, and that's like a big jump to even do that. So, God bless you if you even have recognized that God's giving you the grace to recognize that this is something you actually need to show up to,
Yeah.
So like, let's not think that, it's either like I'm going to be perfect and like my prayer life is going to be so amazing, I'm going to be so in tune with the will of God, or I'm going to be completely apostate and completely reject him and refuse to cooperate in any sort of way with his will. Like it doesn't work that way. You have to put in time. Love, if you love God, love is something you have to will to do. It's an action. Like you have to, just like marriage, which I'm sure you have experience with, like sometimes you have to like force yourself to love somebody, and that's when it's real love.
Never. It's easy all the time, George. Just wait.
Yeah, I know. Just wait. And all of you think, oh, here we got this 24-year-old young buck talking about like he knows everything. I do not know everything, but
yeah.
I do know things have gotten a lot easier since I started prioritizing God over everything. And people might say, well, of course you should prioritize God over everything. But then when you actually start living that out, they get concerned.
Right.
Like you tell somebody, yeah, like I genuinely, value my faith over all these other things. And they think, well, like, how's that going to impact your relationships or your vet school / vet career, So it's hard. And how do I help others? It requires, a complete transformation of how you are viewing the world around you, and that's what's so hard is it literally requires like installing a new framework into your mind, that how you're going to look at things. And like once you've done that and you're going to the gym every day and you're getting stronger and you're learning the motions, because everyone knows like the first time you do an exercise, it's you might not even get anything out of it, honestly, because you might be doing it so wrong and no one's there to tell you. You could actually be doing more harm than good potentially, but um, it's not, you have to start somewhere,
Right.
and this is the thing we're talking about. People are afraid to start.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, you look at New Year's resolutions, right? It's hard. You have these grandiose ideas, but then the actual, once the rubber hits the road, actually getting started. We've been talking at church, going through, uh, kind of this idea of a home inspection, looking at, at First Corinthians, where Paul talks about how each one of us ought to be careful in how we build upon the foundation, that we ought to avoid building with wood and straw because it will be consumed in the fire, but rather build with precious stones, gold and silver, because it will pass through the fire, and bring honor and glory to God. And that's part of it. And we talk an awful lot about how even the wood and straw, those might be really good things done for the wrong reasons. And we go through these motions of going through the motion of doing all these good things, but we do it because we just have this sense of social pressure, religious obligation. We want people to look at us differently. And we get caught up doing all of this stuff that on the outside looks good, but at the end is just not going to benefit anyone, not us, and certainly won't bring any glory to God. Which means that you have to be intentional about building with gold, and gold is costly, and it's hard to work with, and it's got to pass through fire to be refined and to be pure. And none of those things are comfortable, and none of those things are easy. And if you think that you can just skate through and check off a few boxes and you're covered, you'll be surprised that at the end how many of those things aren't there in your hands at all, and certainly won't bring any glory to God. I when you talk about that type of intention in vet school, and knowing full well you're getting ready to go into clinics, and this was something that, for my wife and I, was really hard to do, because in life there are these different seasons, and the intention of what we do and how we do it and why we do it, the actual nuts and bolts of that changes depending on the season. So there was a time when we first got married that we could go to the gym together, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon after we got off work or whatever. But then we had kids, and then we couldn't do that anymore. And then it had to be 5 a.m. And then our third son, our third child came along, and he would wake up at 5. So then we couldn't do it then. So how do you, how was your intentionality and the follow through for you going, into your third year? And then what are you looking forward to going into clinics, knowing it's going to change? How are you going to be intentional about continuing that?
That's a really good question, and it's something I'm excited about. You mentioned in that one verse, was it from Colossians, to make all your work, say it again?
Do all things as unto the Lord.
Yeah. So when you offer everything you're doing as a sacrifice to God and consciously think of it that way, it doesn't matter what you're doing.
Right.
And so I was thinking about this, while I was writing an essay for something. We were talking about, as vets, it might be Christmas morning and we're out in the freezing cold putting the uterus back into a cow while the farmer stands there. Both of our families are alone,
Yeah.
at home, wishing we were there. And here are we, like, what do we make of this? And you could say, well, this sucks.
Right.
Or you could say, like, what a blessing that I get to have the opportunity to make this a meaningful moment for this farmer. Like, who else is going to be there for him in that moment?
Right.
It's not just about the job, it's the people you work with. And it's the same thing when I go into clinics. I'm excited because I'm going to get to interact with so many different new people, and And what a great way to be intentional about your interactions with others, to be the salt and the light,
Yeah.
and or as a father or a mother, with the caring for your children, you can be intentional in everything. And you can pray without ceasing through that. But you have to, like I said, with the framework, your framework has to be adjusted to see those things in the light of the cross and the resurrection, you know?
Yeah, it's just like the idea that is everything that we do as unto the Lord really comes back to that perspective. Which glasses do we have on? And I appreciate what you said. You could be out there in the freezing cold dealing with a prolapse, and yes, it was a good thing helping the farmer. But if you're not looking through the lens of this being a pastoral prolapse opportunity or a way to honor God, it changes, right? Because your intention is completely different. If you're there just to fulfill an obligation, just to fulfill a duty, as opposed to loving God's creation, loving God's people, in a way that honors them and shows respect to them and shows kindness and gentleness. Um, I've been through a lot of those similar circumstances where, one time I'm dealing with an emergency like that and I have a good godly attitude, and then other times where I'm grumbling the whole time. And I know full well afterward which one was honoring to the Lord. The outcomes may have been exactly the same, but
Mm.
the intention was much different. And as veterinary professionals, we have to learn how to approach everything that we do with that intention, whether because the actual nuts and bolts of how it looks and how it works out will be different depending on the season of life that you're in. And there are things that you can do in a clinic setting that are different than what you can do at home in your church, and different, but like the intention can still be there and be present in each and every one of those. How do you, looking forward with your faith walk, um, at the moment? So I guess at the moment, where is it that you see the place that, the greatest challenge as you're getting ready to move forward from the place that you're in?
The biggest challenge is I just have to, I'm entering a new phase of my life,
Hmm.
and everyone's like, oh, well, God's gonna have great things for you,
Hmm.
in the next phase. And that's true, and I believe it, but also I'm allowed to be sad for what I'm leaving behind.
Yeah.
And part of that is the Christian Veterinary Fellowship Club, and also some other faith groups I'm in, where, I've literally given like my heart and soul into this. And so to move on is really hard.
Yeah.
And but also I'm just thankful that I even have these opportunities. I don't know, you're allowed to just be a little sad about it,
Right. Well,
Um,
it's grief, and grief. I mean, you don't grieve things that don't have value, right? We lose things all the time that we don't grieve over because they don't have value. But the blessings of God, the good things of God that He's poured out upon us, that have been so precious, with even when we change places in life, we're going to grieve, and that just shows. I think that grief actually is a reflection, um, of God's goodness, because apart from God's goodness, there's nothing to grieve, right? And so when we experience God's goodness, and then we have to transition to something different, it's okay for us to appreciate the value of what God had given us before. Yeah, sorry, that made me pause for a moment just to think about some of the things that I've missed out on. Well, again, this type of challenge within the veterinary profession, is something that is seen as, even within vet school. I mean, we have the exact same types of challenges. And if you were to give some advice to someone coming into vet school, someone who maybe would have identified like you had as a Christian coming into vet school, what type of advice would you give to them, as they enter into this time? What to look forward to, what to be aware of, to be able to grow during this process?
My biggest piece of advice, and I wish I had followed this all when I was at Penn State in my undergrad and also in the first year I lived here, is that you have to find a faith community and cement yourself there. Um, and I think a lot of people, it's hard when they're transitioning or something. They're like, "Oh, I'm afraid to go to a new church or something because it won't be my last church, or I'll just watch the live stream of my old church or something like that." It's like, hard as it is, like, God desires for us to live out our faith in community with others, and that's a reality. And in today's age, I think it's sort of been diminished to sort of like this individualistic sort of thing. And your relationship between you and Jesus is critical, but also it doesn't exist in a vacuum. And in order for that to be properly nourished, you need to be in community with others. And CVF's a great way to do that. But as they say every year at the officer leadership thing, that this isn't a replacement for church. And you understand this as a pastor more than anyone, how critical it is for people to be in a community like that. It's and it's often like when we get busy, that's like the first thing we cut.
Yeah.
And speaking of like our orderly priorities, like that has to be a priority, and everything else will flow from that. It's 1 hour. It's 1 hour.
That's right.
Unless you're unlucky, then and they ramble on, then it might be like 2. But
hey, now it's personal. Now you're getting personal.
Yeah, but and hanging out before and after, of course, and all that stuff. But it's just a little thing that I guarantee you will make the rest of your time more productive than it would have been otherwise.
Right.
So,
like you likened it to, that intention, like going to the gym, right? The hardest part is actually getting there. Very rarely do you leave saying, "Oh, that was not worth my time." And being in fellowship with other believers, it's, as veterinarians, we're only as strong as our team, right? If you don't have good relationship with your technicians, with your assistants, or with your front office staff, if you don't have that, everything falls apart. Like, you have to exist within relationship, and your faith walk is no different. And so in school, CVF groups, Christian Veterinary Fellowship groups, are crucially important, and to maintain that connection. Getting to a church, crucially important to maintain that connection. Even as an organization, CVM exists to help provide that kind of community. And so through regional representatives, through area directors, we have missionaries, we have volunteers, all these people that are willing to come alongside you and walk with you in your faith journey. And even ministries like this, with this podcast, we've been doing this for almost a year now, and hopefully, if folks are listening, they'll find one of these surveys on social media or on email and respond to let us know, because ultimately this isn't about me or about CVM trying to produce something. It's about coming alongside people and encouraging them and being the body of Christ. And so with the right kind of input, we can help serve folks in a better way. I really appreciate this conversation with you, George. Yes, God has good things in store for you in clinics in the next stage. God has the power of his presence is, regardless of what happens, the power of his presence is the best gift of all. And so I'm confident that you'll be able to navigate through those things, and look forward to hearing from some veterinarian in 2025 that has hired you on to work on their dairy practice. George DeMers, don't forget the name.
Thank you.
Well, it was a pleasure talking with you, George, and I look forward to hearing about how God continues to work in your life. And for everyone who has been listening, quit trying to kick the can down the road, right? Let's get after this right now, right here, because when you understand the intentionality of relationship and fellowship, the intentionality that God desires from you in your relationship with him, when you start to understand how all those things fit together, you learn how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Thank you for listening to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. If you are blessed by this content, like and subscribe so that you are alerted when new content is released. If you would like more information about CVM, or if you have questions, comments, or topical suggestions, you can find us online at www.cvm.org. Or you can contact us by emailing podcast@cvm.org. God has a plan for the nations, and that plan includes you. We pray that CVM has encouraged you to live out your calling with confidence and competence. So, until next time, may the voice of the shepherd ring loud and clear as you follow him in faith to the intersection of two roads crossing.